Hey everybody, this is the 80s Slasher Librarian. Before I start tonight, I want to say we're getting ever so closer to 500 subscribers. If we hit 500, as soon as we do, I'm going to begin a giveaway where the winner will receive 2 books. A 2-book giveaway once we reach 500 subscribers. Let's keep those numbers going. And welcome to all the new listeners out there. I'm glad to have you on. Tonight, we continue Friday the 13th, Hell Lake, Chapter 11. In the few moments it took her to withdraw from the sight of those loathsome, putrid features to find her way back into the camper with her friend and their charge, they had come under a siege. "Where are they all coming from?" Shauna spat her question at Gretchen as if it was a demand. As if her friend, her gently pale skin now completely white, had any more idea than her. They slid on their toned backsides into the furthest corner of the camper, across dirty sheets and unwashed plates. Amy began to cry and whimper. Shauna had to remind herself it was not the girl's fault if she couldn't be strong. What difference did it make now anyway? All they could do was face up to what was happening, even if it meant the end. But Shauna wasn't going so easily, and neither was Gretchen. As the tall brunette impatiently dragged the weeping, traumatized girl whose abused form was covered by a blanket, pulling her out of the sights of the shotgun, her benign friend produced her own firearm. With shaking hands, Gretchen loaded her newly purchased pistol and steeled herself to look down its sights for the first time, clasping it tight. It was a petite .22 caliber, an essential buy for the paranoid modern lady who wants to stay breathing at all cost. "When did you—" "I told you I had a gun license," she said angrily. "I've been holding this till I knew I'd have to use it." And that time had surely come to pass. Bearing down on them all mercilessly, the sound that closed in upon them drowned the moronic chatter of lame brains and psychos. Though their shrieks and jeers could still be heard. These were the sounds of industry, of power tools. "Oh shit! No!" Sparks flickered their pyrotechnic threat onto the floor around them. It took a manic shuffling of feet to ensure they weren't about to burst into flames. The heat came from the windowless far side of the camper directly behind them. That was where a burning line had started to trace its way around a large expanse of the camper's metal exoskeleton, burning its way through, second by intolerable second. The crunch of metal from outside the door told Shauna her Honda was being thrashed. It was the last obstacle that blocked entrance to the camper van. That huge, misshapen man, that thing, was attacking it with all of his bulk. His unwelcome putrescence would soon be with them. Shauna and Gretchen tried to scuttle in opposite directions, each to train a gun upon the openings in the camper. Amy screamed, "No!" as they scrambled across the floor, mistaking their frantic haste for desertion. Gretchen looked helplessly at her as she tugged at her cheesecloth shirt, reluctant to push her way until Shauna insisted. "Get the door, I'll take the wall. Take as many out as you can. Got it?" It wasn't going to be that many. If she wasn't mistaken, that teeth-gritting buzzing noise was a chainsaw. A reinforcement to help the creep with the welding gun break his way through. She had one final double round of shot left that they had been able to retrieve. After that, it was down to Gretchen. And beyond that, she begged whatever power or life force there may be in this universe to let the end come quickly. They were in the middle of an imploding tin can, and would soon be at the mercy of those who were ripping it joyously to shreds. In the lanes and walkways crisscrossing the highway services section of Forest Green, the mood was heavy and solemn. There were more now, more than there had been before their numbers conjoined, swollen to well over a dozen young men, just a hair short of a score. Their numbers were many, but their weapons were light, improvised. A few blades here, a few lengths of piping there. One kid optimistically carried a slingshot, and was a pistol with just a couple of bullets left. 2 of the invaders lay dead or dying, their facial and abdominal wounds trickling red onto the floor. But still one leering maniac advanced, with thin, scraped black hair, thick lips, and a wide nose. His features lent themselves naturally to the full clown makeup that he wore. He was a nightmare out of childhood, a drooling, lustful reminder of the darkness that longs to despoil innocence. "Hey, little girl, want to try some of my cotton candy?" Shauna Black had spent the last round of shotgun ammunition, at least one barrel shooting wild into the inner shell of the camper. Now she pulled at the matted hair of Ben Wellman, digging her nails deep into the back of his checkered shirt. "Ah, you fucking bitch, I'll get back to you in time, honey." It was almost like extra stimulation as the partially nude body of Amy Maven squirmed below him. He had come back to reclaim what he now saw as rightfully his. Payment in kind for the damage done to his and Harry's van. As Wilman pulled down her bra and revealed her pert little white breast, Amy would sooner have been anywhere else on earth right then. She would sooner have been dead. Ugh! The scream rang out as the bullet blasted a goodly proportion of the facial tissue beneath the clown's makeup. "I'll see you in hell, darling," he groaned through his broken mouth as he sank to the floor. "Did he really think that I wouldn't fire?" Gretchen said amidst the moment of hysteria. "Did these madmen think that they were running the place?" Then Jason advanced. He regarded the chaos and carnage all around him through his mutilated eye. Like all his other wounds, his scar tissue, his partially decomposed flesh, it had healed so that it was now but one part of his overall deformity. Though part of the cornea was now cut loose from the eyeball, it still functioned as one eye that saw everything through a tear in the visual fabric, a jagged slash that ran through the center of his world. Then he regarded the sexual assault that was taking place at his feet. "Hey, big guy!" The hillbilly leered as he started to pull down his jeans. "You want to take turns with her after me?" Jason's machete came down on the camper van rapist's head. Ben Willman was frozen in shock, frozen in a moment in time as his skull was sliced in two. As the legendary murderer of Crystal Lake withdrew his weapon, the bloody severance of Willman's cranium left his brain exposed and bisected. All was silence, except for the choking and clucking as his mutilated cerebrum sent him into terminal convulsions. Nobody knew whose side Jason would take now. The perplexed deviants who had joined the attack so enthusiastically began to back off. Shauna and Gretchen began to hope against hope that his obvious distaste for sexual transgressions might bring everything to a halt, that the unpredictability of their enemy might yet be their salvation. Then his puritanical rage exploded again. As Amy lay sobbing, her partial nudity stoked his anger. As the hillbilly lay in an unholy mess of cerebral tissue and blood, the sight of his hysterical victim drove the man-mountain insane. One slash and the machete made a clean cut of her screaming larynx. As the cold, stained blade withdrew, dark crimson gushed from the diagonally dividing cut he had made through her voice box. Amy was silenced forever, but screams welled up in the throats of the protectors who had failed to save her. The reserve ranks of the pervert army made a scrambling retreat from the back of the camper van. Jason was everyone's nemesis. Even those who regarded themselves as allies were liable to face his wrath. His hatred and disdain for everything tainted with the pall of sexuality. His hatred for most things living. "Gretchen, for Christ's sake, move your ass!" Shauna was climbing through the smashed windshield at the front of the van, her bleeding palms paying no heed to the glass embedding itself deeply within them. But Gretchen remained transfixed, semi-catatonic over the corpse of the young woman they had failed to save. Shauna's words were not reaching her, but still the deformed hulk advanced. She glared upon him, no longer pulling away in horror. Shauna knew her friend had gone into shock, that she was waiting like a lamb for the slaughter. He looked almost tenderly down on the girl. Her calm served to pacify him. For her to be so willing in the face of death was like a gift, a peace offering from someone accepting of her fate. That she could stare so deeply into the twisted face of death with those kindly, benign eyes. She took Jason back into the midst of his past, into which he only half remembered. Her strong, fair features and her pale blue eyes reminded him of the only woman able to gaze on his ugliness with affection. Jason, in his turn, was becoming transfixed by Gretchen. Then Jason's mutilated eye exploded. This time the orb was blasted out of existence in a spray of blood and dark, fatty jelly. It left nothing but a red, empty socket as the gigantic killer lurched, almost knocked off of his feet. "When I said move, girl, I meant right now." Shauna yanked her brutally along the floor, dismayed at having to risk her own life further. She passed Gretchen's handgun, from which she had fired the last shot, back to the men of Forest Green, whose clambering hands were waiting for them to climb through the front of the van. Trey stood close to them, his Chinese spear aloft in his hand, as if it might counter the human monster if it went on the offensive. But Jason, for now, had to cope with the pain and his partially obliterated sight. Shauna's open hand smacked hard across Gretchen's face. It brought her back to consciousness just enough. She followed her friends as they climbed, crouched, and clambered over the broken glass of the windshield. Outside, everyone was being pulled into the vehicles that remained in a drivable state to make good their escape. In the back of Jerry Nelson's pickup, they watched as the deformed behemoth came staggering, half-blind, through the burnt hole in the camper van. Gretchen responded to her friend's perplexed glare with surprising indignation. "I looked, but I didn't see evil there." She spoke as if awakening from a dream. "I only saw damage and sadness. Deep, dark sadness." Chapter 12. "You can't fight a forest fire with a thimbleful of piss." The lawman's craggy face became more sour with every mouthful of cold coffee he swallowed. In this late hour there was little optimism to be found among those who couldn't go to bed for fear their entire jurisdiction might become extinct by the time they awoke. No, you can't. Ed North was determined to remain courteous to Sheriff Casey. It was a little incongruous, but the doors of Shemp and Darrow were always open to him in these dark days, ever since the new attorney in town had started offering advice on legal precedent in times of civil disturbance. And that, Casey was forced to concede, was where they were at. This was no mere crime wave. But you can fight fire with fire. The citizenry can be empowered in dark days like these. Make them aware of the extent of the limits of their powers, and you have a few hundred extra sworn-in deputies straight off the bat. The precedents he cited stretched all the way back to the wording of the American Constitution, and the citizenry's right to form an armed militia to oppose political tyranny. This, North argued, had a direct parallel in the situation they were facing today, the tyranny of bad men. A class act, Diane had long since decided, and watching him give his spiel to Sheriff Casey only reinforced her view. In everyday peacetime, it would have made her more than a little uneasy to have the cops regularly come into the office to confer. In fact, the situation would have been downright untenable. But she appreciated that Ed was only staying true to his word and preserving the rights of the individual citizen. In a situation of civil emergency, who could say that he or she was truly a free citizen, when the quality of their life was dictated by a violent mob? If Ed North drew from an eclectic range of sources, many credible, some totally indefensible, like the citizens' right of retaliation against people who defied the perfidious Jim Crow race laws in the Old South, to state his case, then at least it spoke to an old-school conservative like Casey. The sheriff may have taken pains to come on like a socially inclusive new Republican, but at heart Diane had always regarded him as a folksy fascist. At least Ed was instilling in him the rights of the citizen. Or that was the way she saw it. But then, since his arrival, Edward North had won over Diane Miranda in quicker time than anyone since. Well, than anyone. "Sounds a little like a lynch law to me, Mr. North, but I guess if desperate times call for desperate measures." Ed and Diane both raised a discreet eyebrow. Look who was suddenly a law and order liberal. "I'm just a little concerned that the sheriff's offices not be removed from their responsibility. Once you take it down to rock bottom, the citizenry doesn't have legal responsibility for its own protection. We do." So that was it. It was about control, not individual freedom. At least they could rely on Casey to be consistent in that respect. Speaking of which, Ed seemed to have been awaiting an opportune moment. "I've been meaning to ask you to take a look at this, Sheriff." He produced a neatly ordered dossier, all bound together in digestible sections within a labeled ring binder, marked Crystal Lake Murders. It carried the orderly but obsessive mark of the single-minded researcher. Casey read the heading. Shoot! He flicked through the contents in a perfunctory, almost disdainful manner. There were archived witness statements and press reports, even artist impressions of the masked suspect. Some of this must have been taken from the local municipal and newspaper archives. How had North found the time to do all of this when he was working the caseload of an attorney at a law firm? Was he some kind of nut? "Yeah, it's all here, all right. Of course, the only reason I'm saying that is that I've seen it all before." Diane couldn't help but feel embarrassed for Ed. Why was he devoting so much time and energy to this crap? She thought they'd finally agreed that the media-hyped figure of Jason, the Crystal Lake Killer, was an inflated piece of local folklore, a semi-mystical archetype. At times, she had a nagging doubt that this charming, intelligent man who'd arrived out of nowhere, had swept her off her feet and into bed, might be, at heart, a flake. It was an overly cynical thought that she suppressed. Still, it gave her pause to listen to him now. "You may have seen some of it before, Sheriff, but I was able to put that together in my spare time, since I first came to town, and much of it relates to contemporary accounts. It's amazingly consistent when it's compared with material from more than 20 years ago." Yeah. Casey perused the file out of a sense of duty, but he remained singularly unimpressed. I see you included the statement from the Garcia boy here. You take that from your disclosure on LeBlanc's arrest? Diane blanched. Where else could it have come from? This was taking his personal interest in the case just a little far. In fact, it was tantamount to a breach of confidence. That was my source, yes. Ed remained unabashed. He had his eye fixed so closely on the ball that he couldn't see how he'd scored a foul. The importance of that particular piece of evidence relates to how Ricky Garcia described a suspect in every way identical to murders committed more than 20 years ago. Casey didn't respond at first, just kept on looking through the file, stopping to mull over some disputed fact or wild correlation. Deputy Spinks took the Garcia statement from my interview with him. Just seemed to me like a crock. I was half-minded to arrest the boy for wasting police time. Ed North had the sheriff where he wanted him. Garcia's testimony corresponds to every last detail of statements given to the sheriff's office by survivors of the first waves of Crystal Lake murders. All this apparently unknown to the witness. And then, as soon as he's back in his college dorm, someone seeks him out on the premises and murders him. The very first of the Forest Green murders. Casey tried to remain objective, but his aging, tired face couldn't help but appear wrinkled. North continued. There's nothing to suggest this boy was an expert on modern folklore or so-called urban myths. He wasn't even born at the time Jason Voorhees went on his first killing sprees. That was it. Ed had said the magic words from criminal researcher to Bigfoot buff in one single breath. Ed, I can't help feeling this whole Voorhees thing is something of a red herring. Diane felt a little uncomfortable in siding against him, stating what she had said. But still, she didn't want to see him undermine his professional credibility on account of a professional interest turning into an obsession. There's nothing but conjecture as to who the killer was. The only Jason Voorhees anyone could ever connect with the case was the son of the dead woman who was posthumously accused of the first murders, and even she was never convicted, so there's no firm evidence. As for Jason, he'd been dead for years, Diane said. Drowned in the lake in the summer of '57, concurred Casey. Glad that Miss Miranda was taking his side for once. I was a boy at the time. Used to go to the camp every summer. Of course, that year I had the measles. And his body was never retrieved from the waters of Crystal Lake, cut in Ed empathetically, as if that proved something. If there was ever any death certificate for Jason Voorhees, then the cause of death it listed must have been purely speculative, as is his demise itself. Now just hold on. Casey raised a hand in the flicker of a smile. If North thought he was going to tell campfire stories while the social fabric was tearing itself asunder outside, the sheriff would put a stop to that right now. Are you telling me we have ourselves some kind of wild boy out there? That the Voorhees kid never died and he's been living feral in the woods ever since, waiting to murder any young person that comes his way? Put like that, even Ed could see it looked more than a little unlikely. But then, that wasn't the angle he was pushing. I don't know, I've really no idea. He sounded disdainful, as if it had been a vulgar thing to take his own suggestion to their strange logical conclusion. But I know you have a murder suspect never brought down by law, who may be still active in the rural center of Forest Green. I know that this personal emblem and his method of disguise is what appears to be a hockey mask. I know that he answers the description of an individual of an unusually large growth rate, possibly due to some freakish syndrome, and that his level of personal hygiene is, by all accounts, far from socially acceptable. Ed recalled a private personal memory of the stinky retard and winced. Okay, let's say that Voorhees has been living off the land all these years, drawled Casey morosely. Let's say he lives in a hole in the ground and wears a mask like the goalkeeper of the New Jersey Devils. Are you saying that this wild man of Borneo has managed to coordinate a whole mess of killers and deviants? Like he's some kind of Charlie Manson? Or leastwise a gang leader like Ma Barker? Ed was a long time in dignifying this ridicule with a response. I make no such claims. I merely state that jurisdiction of Forest Green has an unapprehended mass murderer in its midst. A murderer who is in many ways physically identifiable and geographically locatable, and that he remains a menace to your community as long as he's at large. Casey didn't have any further argument. He could bitch about the detail, but a few facts were unassailable. In fact, if you're to mobilize the citizenry to cope with the state of emergency, Sheriff, then I suggest you make this Voorhees, or who or whatever he is, into your very own public enemy number one. And that your deputies, any deputized citizens, anybody with the capacity to do so, should be instructed to do their utmost to bring him down by any means necessary. Voorhees will not give himself up voluntarily, Sheriff Casey. The Sheriff's Office and the good people of Forest Green should resolve to destroy him. Okay, this has been chapters 11 and 12 of Friday the 13th, Hell Lake. I was going to drop this video tomorrow, which is the normal day for my Friday the 13th uploads. Went ahead and dropped it early tonight. So tomorrow I'll be back with another Nightmare on Elm Street Protege upload. Hope everybody's enjoying these two books right now. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Please click that like button. I appreciate the time you take to do that. I really do. Drop me a comment. You know I love hearing from you guys and talking back and forth, getting feedback from you. Be sure to click the bell so you always know when new chapters are dropping. You never know when I'm going to drop chapters early like I did right now. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening and have a great night.